千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we take a deep dive into the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. As always, I want to extend my welcome to you. Thank you for joining us. I would like to invite you to center your thoughts and direct your attention to this moment in time, to the here and now, to be fully present and mindfully aware as we are ready ourselves for this sacred process in the Tao with one another. Now, without further ado, let's get right back into Tao Te Ching, Chapter 3. As we talked about previously, the chapter title, again composed of 3 characters, translated as pacify the people. And that's because the first character, an, means peace. It means to bring peace to someone or a group of people. The second character is the people, which in the ancient context is the subjects of a kingdom. In today's context, this character will point to yourself, your state of mind, as well as everyone you interact with in your life. To bring peace to the people or to yourself is a concept that maps the best way to rule a kingdom in ancient times to the best way to manage your life in the here and now. As I mentioned, especially in times of chaos, this is all the more important. So, as a recap, here's what the chapter looks like. 15 lines that when we did the sectional analysis, we managed to divide it up into 3 sections. In the beginning section, we've got 6 lines that is further divided into 3 sets of 2 lines each. So these are the 3 concepts that we went over last time. And this is already formed as advice to the ancient ruler to watch for certain things, that there are things the ruler should not do in order to bring peace to the people, and peace that would in turn lead to prosperity and abundance. So as we talked about, Lao Tzu advised the ancient ruler to not glorify the achievers, to not go overboard in glorification. Do not set aside goods that are hard to obtain as treasures to be lusted after, to not emphasize desires. So these will all be ways to bring about more peace, less contention to the kingdom. And we'll do a quick recap on those. And then this leads into section 2, which is about the governance of the sage. In other words, wise governance, the best way to govern. And there are 4 specific things which we will talk about in the method or the objectives that are recommended by Lao Tzu. Lastly, in the 3rd section, it's the summary that brings everything together. Why should the ruler do the things or watch for the things not to do in section 1? And why should the wise governance involve the 4 items from line 8 to line 11? These are all brought together in the last section. And the bottom line is that the ruler that can be wise to do all of the above, nothing will be beyond the control of such a ruler. So by the same token, for us, if we're able to do these things in our lives or their equivalents, then there will be nothing beyond control, that despite the fact that we're living in times of chaos, we can still bring about peace so that we can help ourselves as well as those we care about. So that's the overview of Tao Te Ching chapter 3. Now let's do a quick recap of what we talked about a few weeks back. The first point that Lao Tzu made as an advice to the ancient ruler was to not single people out for excessive glorification. And the reason why he said that was because the people would squabble, as you see in line 2. Do not glorify the achievers, so the people will not squabble. That is, they get into competitive contention against one another. They get into this race to see who can be better, who can outdo others. That inspires not only the contentious behaviors, but also people can harm themselves as a result of trying to outdo one another. And there's also going to be envy and jealousy. The achievers become overly arrogant, too much pride. These are all getting into territories that are harmful or negative in the Tao. So as a way to illustrate that, I used this particular graphic last time. It laid out 3 different things for consideration. The way that this is intended, and we're going to become much more explicit about this with the other examples given by Lao Tzu, is that we examine the extremes on a spectrum, like too much or too little. Then we look at the balance or the point of equilibrium between the 2 extremes. And always the Tao falls within the range of equilibrium between the 2. So if we go to the extreme of glorification, we single people out and go over the top in glorifying them, then that's got negative effects. So as an example, we talked about a school system where all the students are rigorously graded and ranked. So the negative consequence is that this leads to a lot of pressure on the students, a lot of stress, and Lao Tzu was right. It leads to contentious behavior or squabbling. On the other hand, the other extreme is to not rank students at all. Everybody gets participation trophies. The negative consequence is that there will be a lack of learning in terms of values. Values like if you work, if you apply effort to improve yourself, you reap the rewards. So students who don't learn that are missing out on an important lesson for the real world. And students should also be in a system where merits, hard work, good results are recognized in some way, that there's earning of merits. So these 2 extremes, we can balance them out in the middle by saying that, well, we should definitely recognize achievements, but we don't need to glorify them. So there's an important distinction between the 2. And the rewards for the recognition can be Tao-centric. It doesn't have to be fame and fortune, which is what Lao Tzu was advising the king against doing. If you reward the achievers too much, you inspired greed among the population. That was the point he was trying to make. So Tao-centric rewards can follow Tao-centric motivation the motivation need not be to chase after fame and fortune. The motivation can be to, for instance, refine oneself to be better today than I was yesterday and be better tomorrow than I am today. So it doesn't need to be material world-based kind of rewards and motivations. So that's the main point for that part last time. Then we also talked about greed, treasuring goods that are hard to obtain. And Lao Tzu said, do not treasure the goods that are hard to obtain, so the people will not become thieves. Greed can lead to thievery. The character specifically used in the end of line 4 is an overall generic term that is not only thievery, but robbery as well. To take by hook or by crook, by force or by stealth. So the goods that are difficult to obtain are the things that we value, material objects, and they can also be things that are just very expensive, easy to be available, and yet hard to afford. So in any case, when greed becomes the primary motivating factor, contentious behavior is the result of that. And in talking about this particular concept from Lao Tzu, Tao masters will oftentimes talk about what money can or cannot buy. So one particular master, one of my teachers, has emphasized this particular point. So I was very happy last time to have that chance to share his teachings with everybody. So this is the slide that I used the last time to illustrate his points. So the Tao master talked about the things that was within the scope of monetary acquisition. Money can buy quite a few things. But then when you think about that, you also realize that there are many, many things as well that money cannot necessarily buy. So you can see here in the examples, you can buy a nice bed, but not necessarily a good night's sleep. To have a good night's sleep means that your heart must be at peace so that you can relax. And that is something that you have to work on, not something to buy. Money can buy exotic cuisine, grand feast, but not necessarily a healthy appetite. A healthy appetite, as the name suggests, requires that you have health. When you are healthy, everything is tasty. When you are not so healthy, there's no appetites. It's a miserable experience. Many of us have felt that when we were sick, perhaps dealt with the flu. And when you have no appetite whatsoever, even your favorite foods can seem completely unappealing. So it is the same with the other examples. You can buy a huge mansion, but to have home sweet home, it's something that you have to work on, to build. And it's related to your relationship with your family members as well. Good family, good home. Same with books and wisdom. Just because you can buy many books, that doesn't mean that you possess wisdom. People who take pride in having assembled a vast library may not have actually absorbed the messages or the knowledge in those books to transform them into wisdom. In a similar way, one can buy a lot of cosmetics, fashion accessories, and so on, but true beauty has to be cultivated from within. And it is certainly possible in ancient times as well as today that money can buy you influence, position, social connections. But to gain actual respect, you have to act like a person who's deserving of respect. To have true friends, you have to be a true friend yourself. So these examples go on. And when I heard about this from the Tao Master, they were certainly eye-opening for me. Each one of them was an area of contemplation for me to consider in my own meditative sessions. And the third point that we talked about last time was about desires in general. Here, Lao Tzu talks about, do not show the desired things so their hearts will not be confused. So this just means that when you set aside certain things for special attention, that you highlight them as especially desirable, that is like setting aside certain individuals for excessive praise and glorification. So then what the ancient ruler should do is to avoid doing that, should instead set an example to de-emphasize desires for the people. And when this is done correctly, the people will follow. To illustrate this idea and also to pull everything together, we've talked about several items to note. There's the fame aspect of life, singling people out for glorification. There's the greed aspect of life, material things, treasures that are hard to obtain. And then there's desires in general, which may not fit into either fame or fortune. So what I wanted to do last time was to bring everyone to this particular slide at the conclusion, which we did. So in the context of ancient times, Lao Tzu basically said to the king, well, if you glorify the achievers, you basically create contention. Well, we map that to today's world in your life and mine. It basically says that you also don't want to single people out for excessive, for over the top treatment, for being favorites. So in other words, don't play favorites, and the flip side of that is don't discriminate against people. Treat people the same. And I always remember that some of the most respected business leaders that I have seen in my own career in the business world, these were always the ones that treated everyone equally. They treated their peers, high-level executives, with respect, but then they also treated the people at the lowest levels of the organization with the same degree of respect. Everyone was the same. And this was the way that they richly deserved respect in return from everyone. For us, it just means that we want to follow that example, and you can always tell how well a person is refined spiritually by observing how they treat the people who serve them. Even waiters, even the wait staff at a restaurant, is this person treating them with respect as well? Or does this person make demands, is rude to the wait staff? That can be very revealing about that person's true character. And the second column over, on the greed part, the ancient ruler had a responsibility, according to Lao Tzu, to not emphasize greed. Indeed, it would be best to de-emphasize. And for us, this just means that we want to de-emphasize materialistic perspectives ourselves for our own lives. That we need to gain the right perspective, and that is to value people above objects, relationships above transactions. Lastly, we talked about desires in general, which I represent here as lust. And the ancient ruler should not emphasize the desired things or set aside certain things as being especially desirable. And this, when you do that, you would tend to confuse people. You give them a lot of objectives, a lot of ideas on what to chase after, and that only causes more confusion. So map to our lives, this just means that we have an obligation to wisely manage the desires in our own lives. We don't want to subject ourselves to unnecessary distractions and temptations. So we can always have a choice or have a say in the matter. We can always moderate the input, the sensory input that we get from the world, so we can manage wisely and we can avoid that confusion. So that's it for the points that we made last time. As you can see, we talked about quite a bit. And now let's go into new territory in the middle part of chapter 3. Line 7 says, thus, the governance of the sage. So let's spend a moment to talk about that. What is the governance of the sage? When Lao Tzu wrote these words, he meant this is the way that the wise rule of the sage king would go. The sage king, the wise ruler, would rule in such a fashion as to expend less effort for much greater results. Now let's map it to our lives. We are all rulers of our own lives, but are we sage rulers? Are we wise rulers of our own lives? So this is about the wise management of all the different aspects of your life. It's about how you manage your internal state, your mind, your spirit, your emotions, your rational faculties, and so on, your learning of knowledge, and so on. It is also about the wise management of your relationships. How do you relate or connect with other people? What friendships do you cultivate? What connections do you forge? And what is your relationship with things? How do you connect to the material things in your world? Do they become things that clutter up your life? Do they actually exhibit useful utilization for your application in real life? Those are important questions. It all comes down to skillful application of the Tao. As I said, wise governance means that the king can rule with less effort, but for greater results. For us, skillful application of the Tao means we can live life also with less effort, seemingly effortless, sometimes much more graceful, but get much better results. These don't just happen. They come about by us learning what the Tao principles actually say, so that there's a direct correspondence between how the wise emperor will rule and how you should run your life. Let's move on. Line 8. The first thing that the governance of the sage will be about is, line 8, empties their hearts. Hearts. Here, the character is the last character that you see there, xin. It is a reference to line 6. The character appears in line 6 as well. And line 6 talks about desirable things confuse the heart. So as you can see, I've highlighted the character in the middle in line 6. It's in the previous section. And basically, Lao Tzu says, do not show the desired things so their hearts will not be confused. So there's that connection between desirable objects and confusion in the heart. So the idea is to empty the heart of that confusion which we can interpret in the following way. The primary meaning is therefore to clear the mind of distractions. Distractions are temptations. And as we live our lives, we know that sometimes all of us, every one of us, there are times when we can have many confusing, contradictory thoughts. Now, these thoughts are unique to the individual, but some examples that I have observed in other people are thoughts that are pulling them in different directions. Oftentimes, I see people harboring two thoughts simultaneously, like, I really want to get stuff done. I need to get stuff done. But that thought is simultaneous with, I want to just kick back and relax. I want to just take it easy. So those two thoughts are pulling that person in different directions. And there are also people who, on the one hand, think that, well, I just want to dedicate myself to a committed relationship. But then at the same time, they're also looking around and they're thinking, wow, so many attractive people out there. These two contradictory thoughts are pulling them in different directions. Of course, we don't always act on these fluctuating thoughts, but we also know two things. Number one, the more such distracting thoughts there are, the more likely we're going to have problems in our lives. And number two, perhaps more importantly, these distracting thoughts, they keep us from being at our best. Therefore, the more we can let them go, the more we can concentrate the mind. Easier said than done. And let's continue. There is a secondary meaning to this concept. So the first character, 虚, and the last character, 心, these together mean humility, a common expression in modern Mandarin. This is used all the time, and it just means being humble. Therefore, the secondary meaning is to empty the heart of arrogance, to reach a humble state. The heart that has been emptied is like a cup that is empty so that it is ready to receive fresh tea, to be poured into it. Fresh tea in this metaphor represents new knowledge, different perspectives, different concepts, fresh ideas. If the heart is full of preconceptions, it is like a cup that is filled with cold, stale tea. It's just sitting around, there's nothing new, and you become stagnant as an individual as well. Moving on to line 9. Line 9 says, fills their bellies. So this is the second thing in a list of 4 that are included in the governance of the sage. To fill the belly, this is metaphorical language. The belly, the stomach, is the metaphor for the basic needs of life. So we have the same metaphor in English. In the West, we talk about bread and butter. We don't necessarily mean the objects bread and butter specifically, but we use bread and butter as a metaphor for the basic needs of life. So we talk about, for instance, bread and butter issues. We also talk about, in the West, the meat and potatoes. Again, sometimes we just mean them literally. There's meat, there's potatoes. Those are objects that we see and interact with. But sometimes we use meat and potatoes metaphorically as the basic sustenance or the basic things involved in certain activities. We talk about, for instance, meat and potatoes activities in a particular job. It just means that things that always happen on a day-to-day regular basis, like a meal. We also talk about kitchen table issues, the issues that we are concerned about when people are sitting around the kitchen table. And again, those issues tend to be the basics with life. How much money are we making? How much money are we spending as a family? What are some big expenses that are coming up or that we can plan for? Those are the quote-unquote kitchen table issues, things that are discussed around the kitchen table, metaphorically meaning the basic issues of surviving and thriving in life. So having gone through those examples in the way that we converse with one another, I think that now you can see metaphorically, this is talking about how the emperor can look after the basic needs of the people. To fill the stomach primarily means fulfilling basic needs. And by the way, when you see the underlined words there, it just suggests that there is a secondary meaning as well, and we'll get to that. For now, though, filling the stomach, fulfilling basic needs, it's fundamental to the wise ruler. The truly wise ruler will look at livelihood of the people as a foundation to build on. There may be some policies that the ruler has in mind to apply, to implement, but those are not ready unless there's a solid foundation for the people to survive and thrive. So this is a fundamental that the emperor should never lose sight of. The people must not be mired in poverty in order for the empire to be healthy, vibrant, and powerful. So that is basic. That is fundamental. Let's move on to the next line. Let's move on to the secondary meaning. As I mentioned, when you see the primary meaning, you can anticipate that there's a secondary meaning as well. In this case, the secondary meaning of filling the belly is to fill oneself with virtues. That is, virtuous thoughts, a virtuous mindset that leads to virtuous actions, virtuous words. The basic idea is that just as food is fundamental to survival, virtues are fundamental to Tao cultivation. That is why 道德经 is the Tao and virtue classic. One cannot be without the other. Indeed, there are specific instructions in the 道德经 to cultivate virtue until the virtues become second nature, automatic, something that you don't have to think about. When that is the case, you can get closer and closer to the realm of the Tao. So here, the emphasis is on virtuous thoughts that have a protective effect against temptation. And now the way that we can express it is to say that when your mind is full of virtuous thoughts, full of virtues, leading to virtuous behavior, this is something that naturally will cause you to not chase after material things. So this is similar to the metaphor in which the sage teaches that in order to get rid of weeds, it is not enough to pull them up by the roots. You must replace them with something like plants, perhaps flowers or crop that can take the place of the weeds. So the crop or flowers would be like virtues that occupy the mind. They leave no room for the weeds of distracting thoughts to come back in to the mind. So that is the whole idea. Okay, so let's continue on. I want to then map this idea to the life that you live, the life that I live, the lives that we all live. The basics of life are just as important to you and me as they were in ancient times to a ruler. What this means is that when we map the teaching of Lao Tzu, the advice that he gave to the ancient rulers, we have to be mindful that he's actually providing the same advice to us. And what that says is that all of us, we want to take care of our livelihood before walking the path. It's a great idea to walk the path of the Tao, of course. That's what we discuss. But just as importantly, the basics, the fundamentals, the foundation to build the cultivation on top of is livelihood. And this is the practical aspect of Tao cultivation. It isn't just about the ethereal philosophical musings about the spirit. The practical aspect of the Tao is about how you can make your existence in the material world one that fulfills your basic needs. So you can have a level of comfort with which to start your spiritual cultivation. So I hope that makes sense. This is an emphasis in the Tao. And this is a little bit different from other wisdom traditions. I want to be sure to highlight that difference for everybody. The Tao has this practical perspective on life. And let me provide this comparison for everyone. In Buddhist tradition, there have been many practices that are focused on living life minimally, which are certainly admirable. In ancient times, there's the original teaching in Buddhism was to renunciate the world, the material world. So renunciation, actually coming from the Sanskrit word naskaramya, it literally meant freedom from sensual lust. And that practice, it was to give up worldly pleasures and whatever else binds us to suffering. In ancient times, there were numerous practitioners who took this very seriously, and therefore they lived life minimally. In ancient China, it was said that one would see through the red dust. The red dust is metaphoric language, meaning the material world. When you decide to become a monk, you see through the red dust of the material world. Because you see through it, you decide to give up on it, and therefore you live a life of austerity. And this was something that many people were not willing to do, and therefore the monks were held with reverence and respect because of their practice in austerity. That's how things used to be. Things have changed in modern times. So today, the Buddhist faith is practiced in many different variations all over the world. And often, renunciation is something that gets reinterpreted. So rather than to give up on all the things all of the pleasures that you partake in the material world, the reinterpretation says you have to give up on the attachment to them. And I hope everyone sees the difference. The idea is that you can still partake in the good things in the world that you enjoy, but you mustn't become attached to those things. Attachment is what brings about the suffering. Now, one thing that is important to realize is that in ancient times, especially in times of chaos and warfare, giving up on the world could be appealing because there's just misery and suffering everywhere. In modern times, with our civilization, with parts of the world being highly developed, you can see human nature would be less willing to give up on all that. Therefore, the reinterpretation. So now that you are aware of that aspect of how renunciation is approached from the Taoist perspective, let's talk about the Tao perspective. Since ancient times, the sages have always maintained that one should engage with the material world because, after all, you and I are living in it. We are in it in order to learn from it. And this is why in the Tao Te Ching, there are passages that talk about mixed with dust. So dust, coincidentally, is the same character as the red dust when we talked about renunciation from the Buddhist perspective. So rather than to see through and give up on all that, the Tao sages would say, we're in it for a reason, and the reason is there is a lesson in the material world. In fact, there are many lessons that we should all learn from. I hope that makes sense. So what about modern times? Does that get reinterpreted? The answer is nope, it is the same. Now, keep in mind that throughout the history of ancient China, there's been great influence from Buddhism into Taoist traditions as well. Therefore, there would be, in ancient times as well as today, Tao practitioners who take on the concept of austerity from Buddhist traditions. But the genuine tradition of the Tao, it is the same idea. We still must mind the basics. Why? Because you and I find ourselves living in the material world, therefore we must deal with it in the best ways possible. This is why Tao cultivators go to work like everyone else. The tradition in the Buddhist path to become a monk has equivalence in the Tao tradition because of the influence, historical influence from ancient times. But when you dig deep into the Tao philosophy itself, it basically is talking about how everyone should be self-sufficient. You should engage with the world as it is. Nothing wrong with indulging in the pleasures of the material world. You just want to watch that indulgence to keep it in moderation, because otherwise you numb your senses. This is the practical angle. This is how the Tao concept and the Tao mindset are different. As we're looking at this, I'm also thinking about the difference between the Western approach and the Eastern approach. It occurs to me that the practical emphasis of the Tao is something that perhaps is better suited for the Western attitude about making sure that you take care of the basics for yourself and your family. At the same time, I also want to recognize that in the Western mindset, there is a dichotomy between being spiritual and being successful. That is, there's still some thoughts about how material success is diametrically opposite to being a spiritual person. Let me then remind everyone that the Eastern approach is a little different. The Eastern approach, consistent with the Tao in ancient times and modern times, is a complete integration of the two. That is, one can be spiritually successful and materially successful at the same time. That there are good ways to become successful in the material world in a way that benefits yourself, your family, loved ones, and everyone you come into contact with. The ultimate win-win scenario. That kind of success isn't a dollar amount that is greater than what other people possess. Rather, it is the contentment and lasting joy that you possess. And the more that you gain based on this perspective, the more you can do or contribute to others, to society, to support causes that you believe in. So I want to highlight those differences as a pathway to understanding. Now let's continue on. Line 10. Line 10 says, weakens their ambitions. It is basically saying that the wise ruling of the king should be something that weakens the ambitions of the people. On the face of it, this may sound a little bit odd. Isn't it a good thing for people to be ambitious? Is the king or the ruler afraid of competition? That is, people can become too competitive and too ambitious, therefore threaten the position of those who are higher up. So that's actually not what it means. Indeed, throughout this entire chapter, there are character utilizations with a contextual meaning that is different from modern Mandarin. And therefore, without historical commentary, those characters can be very misleading. So we're about to talk about all of that, starting with this. When we talk about weakens their ambitions, this is a match to line 8, which you can see right above, empties their hearts. So the line to empty their hearts was about the desirable things, which harkens back to line 6. So keep that in mind. Line 8 is about the desirable things. This right here, it goes back to the glorification for excessive praise for the individual, and that's ambitions and that is the lure of power. Simply by looking at these two lines together, you can figure out that this ambition here is something that was used in a negative context in ancient times. Like when we talk about blind ambition, an ambition that is so overwhelming that it blinds you to reality, that it becomes unrealistic, and the pursuit of it leads to negativity. Those are the negative effects that can happen when you succumb to the distraction or temptation of power. Now, it should be clear what Lao Tzu is trying to say. Lao Tzu is pointing out that, number one, the desirable things, that's all about greed, all about envy of what people possess. And this line here, ambitions, fame, glorification, this is all about the ego. This is all about being powerful to lord it over others. These literally are the strongest temptations in life. So line 8 and line 10 together are basically Lao Tzu saying, of the strongest temptations in life, there is a lot that the king can do to set an example, to take it down a notch, or to dial it back, to de-emphasize, to let the people know that those things are actually not the most important in life. So that is the main point. Lao Tzu knew even back then that excessive greed, blind ambitions, those are the things that people tended to chase after, and people who did so, they quickly found themselves being led to ruins. They ruin their lives chasing after power or chasing after desirable things. Okay, next slide. Now let's talk about ambition, the character. So this character you see as the last character of line 10. It's translated as ambition. This character on its own is neutral, and it can be a positive thing. For instance, it can be a worthy goal, it can be a noble vision, it can be something that you see far ahead as an ultimate accomplishment that is worthwhile. Here, it isn't exactly that positive context that I just mentioned. Contextually here, it refers to blind ambitions that, as I mentioned, will ultimately lead you nowhere. It is therefore all about people fighting for the ego satisfaction of gaining power. This is, of course, quite different from the desire for material things. Those are like worldly attachments tied to objects, acquisitions. This is people fighting over recognition, prestige, fame. As I mentioned, this is all about the ego satisfaction of pursuing ambitions, gaining power, gaining fame, and so on. So I think you see exactly what Lao Tzu is getting at. Next line. Just as line 10 matches line 8, there's the emptying the hearts of desires, weakening blind ambitions. That's the first part of it. This part here matches line 9, fills their bellies. Fills their bellies, strengthens their bones. These are done poetically, so the construction here in the 4 lines is A, B, A, B. Now, of course, filling the bellies, we talked about that being fulfilling the basic needs. So what about this right here? What about strengthening the bones? To strengthen the bones is just as metaphorical linguistically as filling the belly. This is about basic character, strengthening basic character. So these, just like 8 and 10 are about the strongest temptations in life, 9 and 11, these two lines are talking about fulfilling basic needs while building character. Those are the two most important things in life. You have to take care of the basics, and you have to become a person of integrity and character. So when we analyze it like that, it's making a certain kind of poetic sense that this is, of course, what Lao Tzu would intend by constructing poetry in this very specific fashion. Just like stomach or belly, that was not literal. I think we can see that in line 9. That was talking about the basic requirements of living, surviving, thriving, etc. In the same way, when we talk about bones here, we're not talking about literally the bones in the human body, but metaphoric language for one's integrity. This should not be surprising for us because even in English, even in the Western sphere, we have similar expressions when we talk about character and integrity. For instance, we often talk about someone having the backbone to stand tall. And that means someone who has the strength of character to take a position, to express it, and to stand tall, be very firm in that position, to be strong in holding to that belief. So from that perspective, we can easily understand why Lao Tzu said, strengthen the bones. Basically, Lao Tzu is telling us that it is indeed possible for us to live the good life, have material abundance, but also at the same time, maintain integrity. We don't need to sacrifice integrity in order to get prosperity. That's the message. So the emphasis of Tao cultivation is very clear. It could not be clearer. It's an emphatic no to excessive attachments and materialism. At the same time, it is a definite yes to the basics of life and the basics of your personal character. As I said, your integrity. So these are the 4 things that Lao Tzu talked about. From line 8 down to line 11, the governance of the sage is the objectives for that governance would be, first and foremost, empties their hearts, fills their bellies, weakens their ambitions, and strengthens their bones. So I decided that I can summarize that pictorially, graphically, visually, with the following slide. So this is just the representation of a person. This is the Vitruvian man, oftentimes used for that purpose to represent the individual. So what should be the work in a wise ruler governing the subjects of a kingdom? This ruler, he or she, would start with empties the hearts of excessive desires and arrogance. That is the first step. And the ruler, the wise ruler, would do so by setting an example. What that means is that the ruler himself or herself would not be living with luxurious items, excessively luxurious items, and be parading that all the time. Second, the ruler would be focusing on making sure the basic needs of the people are met. Sustenance, shelter, security, infrastructures. So that's fill the belly and satisfy the basic needs of life. So in this graph, I point to the stomach or the belly. So what's next? Well, you've already seen the progression, so you can expect that the next item for the ruler to focus on is to weaken the mind of unrealistic ambitions to focus on reality. This is because, as we mentioned, as we discussed, it is foundational for a strong kingdom to have that strong basis. The economics must be sound. There must be production, there must be productivity, the people must be working to better the kingdom as a whole, taking care of the basic issues. So rather than to focus on unrealistic ambitions, practical reality is more important. And finally, the strengthening of the bones. Strengthen the bones of integrity and character. That is, the ruler would promote the value of integrity and character as important virtues. This is also done by the ruler setting an example. The ruler should always be the one to exhibit integrity and character and not compromise either one, even in the face of difficult decisions. Looking at this right here and looking at the four moves, the four objectives of the sage ruler, we can see that the subjects of a kingdom, what they need, like the basics, like integrity and so forth, what they need match exactly what we need in life. The subjects of a kingdom need the same thing that a person needs in life. Looking at this list right here, yeah, we should do something about the desirable objects, the many desires that beset us. We should be taking care of the kitchen table issues, the basics of life, and we should be mindful of unrealistic ambitions that take us away from practical everyday reality. And last but not the least, we should also be focusing on our own integrity and character. So living in the modern world in that sense is really no different than living in ancient times. And that's because human nature has remained the same. To emphasize that, I think that I want to present a side-by-side view that maps from the ancient setting to the modern world to see that Lao Tzu, what he talked about, is very applicable in this day and age. In this table, the same as last time, you see the top row applying to the ancient context, the king or the emperor. And then the bottom one, that will be you and me. So let's talk about emptying the heart. As I mentioned, the king should set an example. Material things are not the most important, and we can connect this to the virtue of humility. And that is because this phrase, to empty the heart, it can mean to empty the heart of desires, to manage the desires. It can also mean to empty the heart of arrogance. How would that map to our lives? It is important for us to moderate our own approach to material possessions. Material things take up space. If they're not needed, they are clutter. And the same is true for the elements of the mind that we carry around in the brain. They become clutter as well if they do not serve us. It is therefore an imperative task for every single one of us to declutter the environment externally and the mind internally. That corresponds with this idea of emptying the heart. Next, filling the stomach. Lao Tzu basically says the ruler should focus on the livelihood of the people, ensure they're able to work for their own prosperity. Give them the environment that is safe in which to work, protect them, and people will find ways to work, to be productive, to achieve their own prosperity. We map that to the modern life. And this basically means we apply the Tao to our own livelihood to attain abundance for yourself and your loved ones. So the thing to pay attention to here is that the attainment of abundance is not contrary to the Tao. It is encouraged in the Tao. Encouraged specifically that you use the Tao, follow the Tao to attain abundance for yourself. It doesn't make you a less spiritual person. It just makes you a spiritual person who can do more to contribute. And then the third column here, reduce ambition. This harkens back to the very beginning of this chapter where Lao Tzu says, don't single out people for excessive praise, for glorification. So refrain from excessive glorification of anyone. Set the appropriate perspective on fame. And that goes back to our discussion on Tao-centric recognition, Tao-centric motivation. How do we map that to our lives? Well, the idea is that we should focus on the work in the present moment without necessarily making that all about the pursuit of fame. Fame will become a natural byproduct, a side effect of doing the work well. It is not something that you need to specifically chase after. When you do so in a very specific way, you are contriving to be known, contriving for fame. Contrivance gets you into the opposite state of Wu Wei. So that's how we can map that to our lives. Lastly, let's talk about strengthening the bones. We talked about bones being metaphorical language for integrity. So this is basically saying that the king, the emperor, perhaps the empress, should emphasize the importance of integrity in the kingdom or empire. Place it above all as a virtue. In other words, your word should mean something. You as a person should be living with integrity. You should be very careful about the possibility that your integrity can be breached. And the ruler would put himself or herself first and foremost as an example of integrity. Now, you, the emperor or empress in your own empire, this means every single one of us should be a person of honor. We should accept no compromise for integrity. We should have that personal code of honor that we don't vary from, that we never compromise. We should be living our own values. When we're able to do all of this, and let me bring back the graphic, the ripple represents what happens when a pebble representing distractions is thrown into the pool representing the mind. The mind becomes disturbed when there are distractions placed in it, like a pebble dropped into a pond. If we're able to do the above, then we can have much greater control and mastery over the disturbance caused by distractions and temptations. And that is the ultimate goal. Continuing on, we are now on line 12. Line 12 says, let the people have no cunning and no greed. So the no cunning part is the middle two characters there that are highlighted in red. I want to single them out. 无知. So literally, the first character is lack, to not have, lacking something. And then the second character there, it means knowledge. When you put the two together, this is a common expression in modern Mandarin. It means being ignorant. It means ignorance. As a noun, it means ignorance, and to be ignorant as a verb. In the ancient context, it means being without cunning or shrewdness. This is important. When we say ignorance, it seems as if on the surface, at first glance, Laozi is telling the ruler to make the people ignorant. How can that be a good thing? When you study the ancient commentary, you quickly realize that is not what Laozi meant at all. Laozi advised the ruler to let the people have no trickery, to not have this negative application of intelligence that leads to scams, that leads to various plots and schemes, to be cunning and shrewd. That's what Laozi actually meant. Not to hide knowledge from people, keep people from learning, but to keep everyone plain and honest by setting an example that the ruler himself or herself would be straightforward, to talk plainly without being evasive, without being cunning or shrewd. That's what it really means. So I want to point out that of all the ancient sages, East and West, Laozi, the Tao tradition overall, very unique in pointing out the negativity of knowledge, that it is clearly spelled out that knowledge can be used for good or bad. Knowledge can be used like any other tool for the benefit of mankind. Knowledge can also be used like any other tool for destruction, for harm and injury. It's like an axe. An axe can be used to chop down wood for the fireplace. It can also be used to hurt people. Same thing. Moving on. Line 12. Now we're looking at the line together. let the people have no cunning. And we'll talk about greed momentarily. Let's focus on cunning at the moment. So if all you know is modern Mandarin, not ancient classical Chinese, especially from 2,500 years ago, when you're looking at these characters, you can mistakenly assume that it means to let people be ignorant. That's not what it means. It doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean ignorance is bliss. Rather, this is about guiding people back to plainness and honesty, that everyone should be dealing with one another in a very straightforward fashion, no trickery. As I mentioned, negative use of knowledge has led to cheating, scams, and so on. We see that in our own lives. We see that plenty in the modern world. You only have to look at your email to see all kinds of attempts to scam everybody, to scam people. In an ideal world, there's no need for that, no need to be shrewd or evasive. It is the responsibility of the ancient ruler to create that ideal world, or at least get closer to it within the scope of his or her rule, the kingdom or the empire. A place where people don't have to be shrewd or evasive in order to attain success, prosperity, abundance, etc. The wise ruler would establish simplicity as the norm, the straightforward honesty as the norm. So this is where we have to return to the discussion of moderation, the scale that I talked about before, the spectrum where on both ends you've got the extremes, and then in the middle you've got balance. This is the scale. It's abstract. It's meant to represent every aspect of the real world. You've got lack, insufficiency on the left-hand side. That's emptiness, nothingness. And then you have too much on the right-hand side, excess. In the middle, you have equilibrium, and that's the point of balance. So let's talk about knowledge on this scale. What is the lack of knowledge? Ignorance at the extreme. Well, it is all about self-deception. It's not just about being ignorant. It's about being willfully ignorant. Willful ignorance, usually due to fear. Fear, therefore, self-deception. This is true particularly when it comes to dogma. For some, it becomes necessary when they realize that on some level, they may be wrong. They reject that out of hand without wanting to see any evidence to the contrary. Basically, they don't want to know. Therefore, they refuse to look at information that would make the falsehood too obvious to ignore. Thus, the open hostility to knowledge. Thus, being aggressively ignorant. Not just ignorant, it's the next level beyond, it's the extreme version of ignorance. It maintains itself in that ignorant state. It can even manifest as pride in one's own ignorance. We actually do see that in our world today, where people would actively attack institutions of higher learning because they subscribe to this version of anti-intellectualism that point an accusing finger at universities or colleges as being out of touch, aloof, arrogant, elitist, and therefore to be completely rejected. So this is the extreme on the left-hand side. What is the extreme on the right-hand side? Any extreme is negative. So what would be excessive knowledge? That would be the blind pursuit of knowledge. This would include the scope of impractical philosophies. And if you're wondering what that could be, it would be philosophies like solipsism, that you cannot be sure anything is real except your own mind, and therefore, as you're hearing me talk about this right now, this could just be a delusion generated by your mind for itself. This is a known and studied philosophy, solipsism, but I'll just point out that it doesn't do anyone any good. You can talk about it forever. It won't add to your life. I'm very sure about that. There's the simulation hypothesis, one that says we could be living in a computer-generated simulation right now, and here are the reasons why. Again, you can go through all of those reasons. You can read up on it. It is not going to enhance your life. There are no real-world applications at all, but there are people who are very much into it. There's also people who delight in accumulating trivia factoids. They'll talk about things that are absolutely not applicable or have no use that one can imagine. They may say, listen, it's a fact. Women hiccup less than men. They'll say, it's a fact. A cat's jaw cannot move sideways. So all of these can be proven, all of these are true, but again, they add nothing to your life. They are oftentimes used for people who want to show off how much they know. Gets right back into the ego. Sometimes there are ideas that are in the realm of excessive knowledge that people chase after that fail upon contact with reality. What are some examples? Well, you only need to look at the many books out there that promise wonderful improvements for your life, but they don't always pan out. A lot of times, I see people try an idea or two from such books. They end up with little or no results or lackluster results. So they abandon the book and they chase after some other knowledge in some other book. That is also the excessive blind pursuit of knowledge. And just as extreme ignorance can manifest as pride in being ignorant, extreme excess knowledge, the blind pursuit thereof, can manifest as arrogance, like I know more than you do, that kind of arrogance. So in the face of these extremes, what is the Tao? The Tao is the equilibrium. The Tao is Tao-centric knowledge. It's practical. It is useful in real life situations. It is something to be applied in daily living. It isn't something that just applies to real life situations once in a while, like annual basis. It is something that you can use every day. It can be tested and proven in real life scenarios. And the better you get at it, the more you practice it, the more you become a wise person. That is, the knowledge that is Tao-centric turns into wisdom. So I want to leave you with this slide as the last slide that we covered today. This is important, and we will cover another example next time in similar fashion. It is always something that we want to keep in mind, that the Tao is always about that equilibrium, the balance in the middle. Now, I would like to summarize what we have talked about today. Last time, we talked about the first part, section 1 of this chapter, and we talked about not glorifying certain individuals. This is translated to summary point 1, no separation, no favoritism, recognizing that everyone has a fundamental connection with the Tao. Number 2 is about greed. Therefore, translates to no need to obsess over material things. They serve us, we don't serve them. And the last one is about desires in general. And this is all about distractions and temptations. This is recognizing that the world is full of them. And we don't need to eliminate all desires, but we want to take the sights and sounds, the distractions and temptations of the world in moderation. We want the point of equilibrium. It is what allows us to be tranquil and unmoved by the distractions or the temptations. What about today? What we talked about today, mostly in the second section, we talked about emptying the heart, translated here as instilling humility in the heart. That is to cleanse it or clear it of greed and arrogance. Number 2, we want to take care of practical needs. This is about filling the belly, to have the full stomach representing livelihood, surviving and thriving. We have every right to do that, to survive and thrive. Number 3, unrealistic ambitions. This is about the blind pursuit of ambitions. We want to recognize that they lead us into something really bad. And beyond the ruins, they lead us to emptiness. So we want to be focusing on practical everyday reality instead of unrealistic ambitions. Number 4, about strengthening the bones, because strong bones, meaning integrity, that is the basis for spiritually powerful life. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.